You're listening to the Cat Breeder Sensei Says podcast. This is your show host, April Catito, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to introduce your cats when it's time to mate them. So you know I have to do my disclaimer, disclaimer, all of the information that I share with you in this episode is based on my personal experience or my personal knowledge. You may certainly not have the same experience or results that I do. So when it is time to mate your cats, it seems like it would be relatively easy to, just put your cats together and hope that they mate, right? Hope that they, get it on. Well, it doesn't always work out like that. Sometimes it can be a little bit challenging, especially if the cats don't know each other. So we're going to talk about how to get them to, hint, hint, like each other and eventually mate with each other. Before we start the show, though, let's hear a message about Cat Breeder Sensei.
Do you want to learn how to become a successful breeder of pedigree cats? Now you can. For the first time ever, enroll in an online training course that takes you step by step through everything you need to know to get on the right track. Visit catbreedersensei.com to sign up today and use code podcast21 to get $25 off.
Okay, we're back. I've had several different experiences when it comes to putting the male and the female together and finding out what works. So what works for one of your cats may not work for another cat. They're all different, and that really applies to every aspect of just being cats in general. They're all different. So you have to kind of work with them and discover what is going to work for you and for them each time you want to mate a certain pair. So let's bring up a couple of examples. Let's say that your male and your female, they live together in the same home and they interact with each other on a daily basis. This could be a good thing, and it also could be a bad thing. So in an ideal situation, if you want the female to be mated when she goes into heat and the male is already living in the house with her, then no problem, right? You wake up in the middle of the night one night to hear some cats meowing and howling in the middle of the night. Everything's going well, right? They're mating, no problem. Sometimes, however, they can friend zone each other. So it's actually a thing, not only with humans, but with cats too. If they cohabitate and they share the same space and they're just around each other all of the time, there are some occasions when the male or the female just is not interested in mating with their quote-unquote friend. So if you find yourself in that situation, what you can do is separate your cats for a day or two. Get them away from each other. Either isolate them in rooms on their own, or maybe just separate the male into his own room, just so they're not able to interact with each other. So if you can notice the signs of your queen coming into heat and her signs of estrus, immediately, as soon as you see that, then separate them. And after a couple of days, introduce them to each other again, and you should get a better response. Now, I have not personally experienced this, but I have heard of some breeders who just say they're friend zoned. They just will not mate together because they live together, and that sometimes will present a problem, but I don't think it's a significant amount of the time. But if they do, try separating them, like I mentioned, for a couple of days and put them back together and see what happens. So depending on how you have your cattery set up, you may have quarters for your stud where he lives by himself and is not around any females. Or you may have a cattery that is shared space, like mine, where the males can see the females and they can smell the females, but they can't interact with them and they can't physically be in the same area as the females. So they know they're in heat, they want to get to them, but they're not able to until I basically allow it. If you have your stud living completely away from your females and they don't know the girls, then That sometimes tends to be a little bit of a challenge, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So let's talk about this scenario where they know each other, but they have not gone to the friend zone yet. That might be where, they're able to see each other and smell each other, and they're familiar with each other, so they're not strangers, but they're not able to be physical at all. They can't snuggle, and they don't share any food bowls or beds or anything like that. So when your girl is coming into heat, you can take the queen to the male when she's in heat and you know that she is ready, usually on about day 2 of her estrus cycle. That's when I take my girls to the boy. And you should have, an almost instant reaction from both the male and the female. Now, this instant can be either good or bad, but we're hoping for a good response, right? We want the girl to say, "Ooh, a male," and the male's like, "Oh, there she is. She's in my house now. This is great. I'm so happy," right? But if they don't, and they don't initially hit it off, you will see the male will kind of flirt with the female, for lack of a better term. I don't know if in his head he's flirting, but they do go through a process physically before they actually get to the mating portion of their day. Now, trust me, they don't all do that. I've put a female in with the male, and he just jumped on her back like Superman, and they went right at it. And then there's other times where I put the female in with my male, and they just kind of check each other out for a while. That can be 30 minutes, that can be an hour, it can be a couple of hours, but usually within several hours they're like, okay, we're gonna do this, and they're mating. That's as long as there's no hissing and fighting and no resistance between the two cats. So just recently I have a situation where my stud actually lives in his own apartment, and it's not in my house. He has his own house in the Cattery, but my female lives inside, and she went into heat, and she doesn't really like new cats. So she gets along with everybody in the house, but when a new one is introduced, it takes her a while to accept that. So I took her to the male, and she was not happy about that. I mean, at all. She was fighting with him. She was hissing at him. She was growling. He was having to defend himself. He was being cornered. He wasn't even trying to pursue her at all. So I thought, okay, this isn't going to work out real well. This is even going to throw her out of her estrus cycle. So I brought her back in, and I gave her until the next day, and then instead of me taking her back out there, I brought him inside, and I put them in a bedroom by themselves, a spare bedroom, and I have the camera hooked up. And I knew that she wasn't going to be real welcoming to him because she doesn't know him. Sometimes you're going to get that reaction because cats don't typically like new cats that they haven't met before, especially adults. And maybe even on top of that, hormonal adults. But I brought him in. I turned my camera on, and I just sat drinking my coffee, and I was watching them to see how they were interacting with each other. And she was pissed. She was jumping at him, and she was not happy he was in there with her. And she was hissing a little bit, swatting at him. He was fighting back a little bit. They weren't fighting, but, they were, I guess, getting to know each other. And I just let it play out because there was nothing violent going on. And I did realize that her reaction to him was way better when she was in her own space than when I took her out to his space. So I was not going to change that. I was just going to let this play out. And he seemed comfortable. He was, walking around. He was strutting around, doing his thing with his tail up. He was getting some snacks. He was, checking her out. He knew that she was in heat. Of course he did. He could smell her. And he was making very good attempts to mate with her, but she was not having it. She would be like, no, don't do that, and smacking him around and stuff. But as time went on, she was being less and less defensive and more interested in him. I don't know how long it would have taken for her to do that had I left her outside in his enclosure. It may have been eventually she would have come around, but She just didn't seem comfortable at all out there with him. So this way, I thought they both were doing well, and I just let it play. So it took about 4 hours. So after about 3 hours, there was no more hissing, there was no more lunging, there was no more. She would even like chase him into the corner and stuff. She wasn't doing that anymore. She was kind of, laying by him and sniffing him and flirting with him a little bit. They were kind of romancing each other. And then 4 hours later, finally, they consummated, and that continued from there. There was no issues after that. So each one is going to be different, and I think you have to find out their mojo, find out what works for them and where they're the most comfortable. I have heard people say if you remove the stud from his area, that he doesn't like that. He's not comfortable because he's very territorial. He doesn't like new environments. But I don't, I've brought this particular boy in on different occasions to mate with females that actually lived inside the home with me, and he has never had a problem. He's never marked, he's never sprayed, he doesn't cause any trouble, he's comfortable inside. So that theory, it may pertain to some cats, but not all cats. So, in this case, I found what worked for her and him, and that's how I introduced them together. If I didn't really have a choice and I was going to put her in his enclosure, or maybe I was going to take her to a stud service. I know some people use stud services. It's not super common in the United States, but in some other places, they will do a slow introduction period. So kind of like when a new kitten comes into the home, how you should do an introduction period and welcoming the new kitten into the home, so that if there's other cats, they don't feel threatened, or they don't feel like they're there to take their resources, or they don't feel like they have to be defensive. You can do the same process when introducing your queen to your male. You can do the tent method, where you put a tent inside his enclosure and just put her in it for 15 minutes a couple of times a day, so that she can meet him and realize that he's not here to hurt her. He's actually here to help her. And once she gets to know him, you can, look for some non-aggressive posturing and let her out, and until they're going to get along and, go through their courtship process and ultimately the mating process. I think that eventually the hormones in your queen is going to take over, and she's going to mate with the male. I have also not experienced this personally, but I do know that from talking to some other breeders that sometimes the two cats just don't hit it off. They don't get along. They're not going to mate. They don't like each other. It's not always the friend zone that does that either. It's just the chemistry, I guess, just like with people. You meet some people and you think, I don't like that person. I don't know why, but I don't like them. Get me out of here. Same thing with your cats. There's certainly some chemistry, some smells, some vibes going on, and they are not digging it. They don't like each other. And no matter what, you're not going to be able to get those to mate. I think that's a small percentage of, your mating population. Like I said, I've never had that experience, but I have certainly, heard of it firsthand from people that I know. Additionally, I've had females who completely will not tolerate a male being around them until they're in heat. And then, he's the greatest thing in the world. So you just have to pay attention to their body language, their posturing, their responses, their reactions. It's pretty normal for them to hiss and growl and box each other. I see that all the time, especially after mating. So that's another topic, but don't be alarmed if you see them punching each other and it looks like, they're in a little squabble after the mating. That's completely normal too. So sometimes just a slower introduction, keeping them separated where they can see each other and know each other until they actually can interact with each other physically. It's really interesting for me to watch two cats who are in the mating process. They go through a method of body language and verbally communicating with each other and just, they're just talking to each other, and it's really interesting to me. I'm always watching on the camera. Maybe I'm weird, I don't know, but I was like, look at him. He's flirting with her. He's, they're like little batting each other on the back, and walking by, and maybe turning around real quick. It's so patience is always the key when it comes to breeding pedigree cats, and the best way to do things is your way. Mother Nature will take over. Only in rare circumstances are you going to be looking at a dead end. So do your thing, make good choices. Let's support each other in a positive way.